And good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. To our audience here at the Missoula Public Library, and all as well with those of you watching on MCAT, Missoula Community Access Television. I want to thank the library for hosting us again here with Wednesdays with the Mayor. I'm Dennis Bragg. Mayor Jordan Hess joins me again as we come back after a bit of a holiday break, get back in the swing of things here for 2023 and covering topics and things of interest. I want to thank all of you that showed. Nice crowd here tonight. We'll get to some audience questions as we go along throughout the course of the evening, and want to encourage you as well, and I mentioned this before we started, but we do have some cards if you have questions that come up as we're going through the initial part of our interview here tonight. I want to thank our crew from MCAT, Joel Baird and his group that are here to help us out tonight and make this telecast possible. So, Mayor, Happy New Year, first off.
Happy New Year to you.
You're all set to go for 2023. Exciting year.
So far, so good.
Yeah, well, we got a big storm coming in later this, tomorrow, so we'll see how well we fare that. I know it's been a busy year for the plow crews and everybody else to get us through this, and it's not over yet. So let's go ahead. Tonight, our main topic that we're going to talk about is the acquisition of the old federal building in downtown Missoula, a building that was built, we compared notes, 1913, I think.
Yep,
right?
1913 was the first phase.
First phase of it, and was built out over a course of years, used as the post office for many, many years, and more recently used for a variety of federal offices. The Forest Service was in there. We also had, of course, U.S. Attorney was in there for a while. Lots of different things going on. But let's talk about this acquisition that was finally closed. I know that, how long have we actually been working on that? I was thinking it was about 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, it's been several years now.
Several years. I know it was pre-pandemic, I think, when it first started. So tell me a little bit about, first off, how does this process work that a local government can acquire federal property when it becomes available?
Yeah. Well, I think I'll start 110 years ago. So the building was built in, as you mentioned, in 1913. It was built in 3 phases. Starting 1913, then 1929, and the final phase in 1937. As you mentioned, it housed a number of federal functions over the years, variety of federal agencies, and it's housed the post office ever since it opened that was one of the very first things in there. In 2015, the Forest Service was the last major federal tenant in that building. And in 2015, the Forest Service made the decision to leave downtown, which actually was a significant impact on our downtown, having several hundred employees that were working in downtown now relocated and working elsewhere. And shortly after that, we became aware of a program called the Good Neighbor Program under federal law. And that's a program that will transfer surplus federal properties to local governments. And you may know in Helena, the city-county building in Helena is their former federal building. A similar process with that, I believe back in the 1970s. But we started kicking tires on that. Mayor Engen really launched that in earnest. And we started looking into the feasibility of acquiring that building. We had significant help from Senator Tester's office in initiating that process with the General Services Administration, which is the federal agency that manages federal properties. In 2020, the General Services Administration declared the building as surplus property, and that indicated that they wanted to dispose of the property and potentially pass it on to a local government partner. Now, that decision to dispose of the property meant that no matter what, the federal government was going to get rid of that property. So either we took it if we were accepted, or it would get sold at auction. That building is a beautiful historic building with a lot of great architectural features. They don't build buildings like that anymore. It'll really last as long as we take care of it. But we had this real fear that if we didn't acquire the building, that it would be so cost prohibitive to renovate it for a private use that it wouldn't be feasible. It makes much more sense as a government office building, and the renovations required for that are much lighter touch. So we really started.
And I was going to say, in some communities, they've actually lost buildings because once it goes to auction, sometimes the property is in the private sector is perceived to be worth more than the actual structure. Yeah. So we have seen cases where communities have lost those kinds of buildings before.
Absolutely. So that was a real fear that building might get torn down and lost for good. So we really started going through our due diligence process. The National Park Service is the agency that ensures that historic preservation plans are met. And we worked with the National Park Service to submit a preservation plan, and ultimately that was accepted, and it was deemed acceptable. And again, due diligence and process back and forth, and we received the deed early this January.
I want to point out, too, about the Forest Service leaving. I think there might have been some misconceptions as to why that happened. Was it because, the building's in a certain condition, doesn't meet? And it really was an efficiency thing for them because they have so many of their operational pieces already at Fort Missoula. Mm-hmm. There, again, buildings became available when the fort was decommissioned. I want to say in about 2010 or so, in that vicinity. It's been a little over 10 years. And so it made more sense for them to relocate. And so their northern region headquarters are what actually moved out there. But it had, as I recall, no real reflection on condition of the building or anything. It was kind of just an efficiency move on their part.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about so as this acquisition takes place, what kind of things did the city consider, especially in the early parts of that process? Because you don't just jump in and say, hey, here's the keys, right? There's a lot that has to be analyzed.
Yeah. Well, it's a free building, but it comes with some costs. And so that's that we did a lot of due diligence on those costs. One of the things that we looked at was how to meet local government space needs for the next several decades. And I should have mentioned this at the outset, but I'll mention it now and throughout the presentation, that this is a joint endeavor with Missoula County. So we jointly acquired the building with Missoula County, and that was and so this due diligence was between city and county all along. But as far as city space needs, the city hall that we're in now was built in 1969. It's about 50,000 square feet. Its last expansion was in 1989. So it was, and that's what got it up to this roughly 50,000 square foot level. When the city hall was built, we had a population of 30,000 people. We had a much smaller city government just because we were serving a much smaller population base. We, over those several decades, have grown. Our space needs have grown, but we haven't had the building space to meet local government needs. So right now we're leasing a bunch of private space throughout downtown. So we have buildings, we have offices in buildings throughout the downtown, as does the county. And so we looked into how we could meet these space needs for the coming decades. We looked at rebuilding on site, building a new building on the site of the existing city hall. We looked at renovating and expanding the existing city hall. And we looked at continuing to lease spaces in downtown Missoula to meet our space needs. We also looked, of course, at the federal building. And of all of those options, the federal building was far and away the cheapest option. So it was significantly more affordable than rebuilding City Hall or renovating on site. And it was really an attractive option. It's not very often that you get to have an option that meets so many objectives, in this case, historic preservation, meeting our space needs, and remaining downtown and consolidating all in one location, and have that also be the cheapest option. So we really viewed it as win-win, win-win-win, really. It was everything aligned to this being the best option.
And when you went through in the city and the county, did you, and I'm asking as a total rookie on this idea, did you go through, did you take measurements? Did you do analysis? I mean, what kinds of mechanical things did you do to come to those conclusions? Yeah,
so we have an architecture team that was part of our due diligence process, and they went into the building and they did some analysis of, of what would need to be done from a space remodeling standpoint, but also just to the standpoint of taking care of the backbone of the building. So it's an old building. It's solidly built. It's a building in good condition, but it also is, like I mentioned, it's 110 years old at its oldest phase. And so there are things in there that need to be upgraded or renovated or retrofitted. A big part of what we need to do is remediation, lead, asbestos, and some electrical upgrades, just real backbone upgrades to bring that building into modern code. And so our architecture team went through and did some analysis. They had a fancy laser scanner that was able to map out the entire building and get the floor plan of the building. And they've also been doing some more what we would call destructive testing. So they're knocking out a few bricks and crushing them and make sure that they meet seismic load standards and things like that. And so that's all been part of that process to come up with an estimate of what it'll take to get the building into a serviceable condition.
What do we know offhand? I don't know if you know what kind of square footage by comparison are we talking with? Say you mentioned 50,000 for City Hall. what kind of comparison do we have?
So the federal building is about 120,000 square feet of usable space. There's of course mechanical space and other space. There's 3 floors above ground and a daylight basement floor.
Okay, I was thinking it was in that vicinity, but I wasn't quite sure. And as you go through, so talk a little bit about why city county too for a minute, because I know that was something we had to work through in terms of the transition of the building and who can actually acquire a building from the federal government. Talk about that.
Well, we need more space than 50,000 square feet, but we don't need 120,000 square feet. We have also found over the years that in the last number of years especially, we've had an increasingly collaborative relationship with Missoula County. We've found that we're working very closely with Missoula County. We also find that the public sometimes is confused about what government jurisdiction offers the service that they need to access. So sometimes people come to City Hall to renew their license plates. Well, that's a county function. They have to go across the street to the courthouse. Sometimes people come to City Hall to go to district court, which is in the county courthouse. Sometimes they go to district court when they need municipal court. And it doesn't help that Missoula City and the Missoula County have the same name. I think people know that they need to access a government service, but they don't necessarily know where they need to go. So it really just seemed like a natural connection to have this excess space that both governments could share and to explore that together. Our vision for that space is to have it really not matter as much to the public when they come down to access government services who's actually providing the service. So our vision is that through design and through staffing, when you walk into that building, it'll be a welcoming space. It'll be a space with a nice information desk and staff that's trained to help you access whatever government service you need, whether it's a city service or a county service. You could pay a city bill at this window and get a county permit at the next window over. So we're envisioning these an area that's really public service focused and that really takes the function of public and customer service into account in the design. So these are all possible because of the city-county collaboration and because, again, we're vacating buildings that are spread around the downtown and consolidating.
I know before the actual deed was transferred, city and the county had to go through and come up with an organization or a mechanism, right, that could actually acquire that, right? You work that out so it's a single owner, a joint owner, or how's that work?
Yeah, so it's kind of in the weeds, but we created a new entity. It's a special district. It has 2 members, the city of Missoula and Missoula County, and it exists only on that block, and they own the building. There's a governance structure, so city and county jointly make decisions, and those decisions can go up to the city council or to the board of county commissioners if needed. Other lower level decisions can be made by the chief administrative officers of both the city and the county jointly. So it's a collaborative structure for making decisions, and it's ultimately vetted by both elected bodies, by the city council and the board of county commissioners.
The reason I ask that is because, yeah, you could see a dispute resolution function or something if down the road, years from now or something, a question comes up. So the elected officials are still very much involved on both sides of that organization.
Absolutely,
right?
And there is a dispute resolution process within this. I mean, if we don't agree, there's a process, and ultimately there's a process for allocating costs. So we'll share most costs equally. Costs to upgrade the building we'll share pretty equally. But if there's a specialty cost, suppose the county needs a really specialty IT upgrade, the county would bear that cost. So we have a way to allocate the costs to the appropriate government and to really gain some efficiencies by sharing a lot of costs and a lot of functions. The county has the county's facility management team is taking on the bulk of the facility management, and that's again just we want one entity that's really managing the facility, and so that's all worked out through that special district process.
I want to circle back because one thing we touched on for a moment was this lack of space, and you mentioned that, and so how the city especially has been leasing space, county has been doing some of that. What kind of burdens has that presented, and what kind of challenges has it been operating, say, as we have over the last, say, 10 years or so with lease space?
Well, I think part of it is just that public access. So the city council chambers is not in City Hall. So people oftentimes show up at city council chambers and at the associated offices in that building looking for City Hall services. So there's just that efficiency aspect of not being in the same space and not having a public front door. There's also a cost, a significant cost associated with leasing space. we spend about $200,000 a year of city funds to lease office space downtown. So this money can get put back into the building, into an asset that we own and that we can control. Another benefit of having those funds being reinvested in the building is that we can take and make upgrades. So if we're leasing space, we can't necessarily go in and make energy efficiency upgrades in the space that we're leasing. And in the building that we own, we'll be able to make those upgrades and really make sure that the building meets our needs and is a good investment for the citizens of Missoula.
Is there some feeling that in having that large of a shift, say from leased space, is there any particular advantage or disadvantage to that? I mean, would it open up additional office space downtown for private sector use, or has that been analyzed? Yeah,
and we haven't analyzed that specifically with regard to this project, but we do know that there's ongoing space needs in downtown, and our understanding is that there won't be any trouble filling those vacancies. We also have some city properties that we'll be able to potentially sell. So City Hall is a city-owned property, as is the City Council chambers. One thing that we could do pretty early on to finance this project is sell the City Council chambers. And that's a space that could be a redevelopment opportunity, or it could be a space that could take on a new life.
Let's talk about other options as was on the table, because obviously you have this option of taking over this building and those kinds of things, but what other kind of recent ideas were also kicked around as well? Should we do this building or something else?
Yeah. Well, so we looked at leasing space. That was the big one. And again, just the constraints that I've already discussed around being able to lease space in a way that meets our needs. It really didn't make financial sense, and it really just wasn't a good long-term solution. We also looked at rebuilding or building a new city hall on the existing city hall site. This had some issues of phasing. What do we do in the meantime? Do we knock the building down? Do we try to build it adjacent to the building? There were a lot of costs associated with just potentially temporarily moving out of City Hall and then coming back in. So that wasn't really all that desirable.
I would think parking would have been a big question there, because operationally, you have especially police in particular constantly in and out of that back lot.
So that would have been a challenge. We also looked at renovating and expanding the existing City Hall. This was not desirable either. The City Hall was, like I said, was built in 1969. And they just didn't build buildings with the same longevity in mind as they did with this federal building. So this building, the City Hall, is really at the end of its life. We have a lot of problems, a lot of ongoing maintenance expenses with, particularly with mechanical systems, with air handling systems, and so those costs really didn't seem to make sense to look at that space. So those were the main ones. Some version of renovating or constructing on site or leasing elsewhere.
Now, you mentioned about the old, current City Hall building. So have we really reached any kind of conclusion about what happens to that then? If it's not you didn't do a very good job of selling it to another buyer just now.
Yeah.
But what happens with that? Or is that something that now that we know we have the federal building, we can start looking at and analyzing that?
Yeah, and so I think that's a really exciting community opportunity. I think that could be an opportunity to develop some downtown housing. I think it could be an opportunity to develop some kind of mixed use where there's some kind of retail and public space on the main floor and some housing above. I think it could be an opportunity to provide some other form of public service. So it's a location where the police department could remain, for instance. But one thing that is a possibility is that we would consider selling that in a very particular, specific way to the right entity in order to finance some of the upgrades at the new building or at the federal building. Of course, anything along those lines would have a public process. We would go through a community design process to make sure that really met the needs of the community. I would say that anything redeveloping a government property like that, especially in downtown Missoula, is a decision that needs to not be made lightly. We need to make sure that there's a robust community process and that what we do with that really meets the needs of the community moving forward.
And this gets back to something as you were describing this use of this additional space I was thinking of. So you mentioned the public-facing part of city, county government operations. Obviously, I come get a permit or I do this, those things. Public service aspect of it. But then there's also the back side. The people who don't, they work in their office, they do things. Then is the vision really to move everyone over from the city standpoint, move all the employees from all these other spaces, existing City Hall, and put everybody in that building?
Yeah, with a few exceptions. So the big exception is that we will not move police to the federal building. Police right now are in two facilities. They are on Catlin Street by West Side Lanes, and they're in City Hall. And we're actually going through a police facility planning process right now to really understand the same thing about police. What are their long-term space needs for the next several decades? And so in the short term, they'll stay in City Hall, and in the longer term, we'll have this planning process to really make sure that we're meeting their needs in the best way possible.
Would that also include court operations, perhaps?
So court operations will be moving. So municipal court will be moving out of City Hall. We don't know where that will be yet,
Okay.
and so that's on the table. One thing that we're doing with the county is an analysis. So the county has their admin building, but they also have the county courthouse.
Right.
They'll move everything out of the admin building, and then they might move some things out of the courthouse. And so we're having an ongoing conversation with the county and with the architects about where would things make the most sense. And it's really preliminary at this point, but that's the process we're going through.
I would imagine some of that discussion is going to be based on joint services, space questions, a lot of those things too, right?
Yeah.
Because county government can be, while it's, to people that don't work with it every day, they may think, well, it's one and the same, but there's very different functions.
Yeah.
Courts in particular. You're not going to move the courts out of the courthouse, as an example. And
courts are a great example of an entity that have a different security level. So one of the things that's a challenge with City Hall right now, back in 2021, the legislature removed our ability to regulate firearms in public buildings.
Right.
And they did it in every public building except their own. I'll note you still can't bring a firearm into the Capitol, but they made it so that you can bring a gun to City Hall. And that is a situation that's not really compatible with courts. And so there's some carve outs for courts you can't bring a gun into a courtroom. But we have a security officer now at City Hall that does a security screening. And that's a function of that, in my view, misguided action by the legislature to open up public buildings to firearms. But that's something that we can look at in the design. And so in the new federal building, we can have a design where we say, what are really the public-facing functions that should be accessible in this more open, this well-designed lobby environment? And then what are things that maybe should have a security screening? And so we can make decisions about grouping things that have like needs together. So courts are a great example. Courts have a unique security need and a unique function, and we can strategically put courts in the right place so that the public is well served. We spend less money on things like security, and we make sure that all of our employees and members of the public are safe as well.
One thing that's interesting to me about this too is how it does present, even no matter where you went, an interesting opportunity, because we've seen so much change. Some of that was driven by COVID and the pandemic. Some of it's driven by better remote access. So, for example, arraignments in courts, much different than they were even 5-6 years ago. It's all primarily remote. You can do those things. So a lot of those things have changed too. Remote work options, right?
Yeah.
Those kinds of things.
Yeah. And we're being very deliberate about how we accommodate remote work. We know that there are a lot of remote workers at the city. More so, there are more hybrid workers. So people who are in the office 4 days a week and maybe working remotely 1 day a week, or some variation of that. So one of the things that we're making sure that we design for is an opportunity for a remote worker to come in and work in the office. And so there would be hot desks, they call them, where you can pop in and work at that desk for a period of time. One of the things that I would say is that on its face, local government space isn't necessarily a really compelling, interesting public topic. But I really want to underscore that I think this is an exciting opportunity to really demonstrate to the public that we can deliver services in a new way. And I think that that's something that that all of these space designs, so they'll make government work better. They'll make our employees work better together. They'll make the interface between public services and internal functions go better. And we can be really deliberate about how we serve the public and how we make the experience of going to this city-county building. At some point, we're going to have to stop calling it a federal building, but the city-county building, we'll make those functions. We can really elevate the experience of those functions. If 10 years ago, if you went to a Verizon store, I would have rather gone to the dentist than go to the Verizon store. It was just a terrible experience, and you waited in line forever, and it was and not that it's necessarily a model experience. Not it's something you do on your free time now. But if you go there now, someone meets you at the door with an iPad, and they take down your information, and they tell you, okay, it'll be a 30-minute wait, and then they text you when it's your time. And I think we can be really deliberate through the space design and through the delivery of the services, how we interface with the public.
Yeah, instead of just having a line of people out the door.
So instead of going and
or bouncing from office to office to location to counter this and that gets really frustrating sometimes.
Yep, exactly.
We're talking with Mayor Jordan Hess. It's Wednesdays with the mayor. We'll take some questions here in a minute. Don't forget, got some cards. You can write those down if you're thinking of stuff as we go. I want to touch on something because this is probably the big thing I'm hearing from folks because of tax pressure and cost and recession and inflation, everything we're facing right now. People are very money conscious. So the question is, why would this be the best or cheapest or most affordable, cost-effective option?
Yeah. So those options that I listed out, the leasing and staying on site, those carry a cost of tens of millions of dollars. Leasing private space to meet our needs over several decades. That right now it's $200,000 a year. Well, that adds up and pretty quickly. And so the federal building, the thing that really makes this pencil out cost-wise is that the building was free. So we received the building at no cost from the federal government. And now we do have some upgrades. So we have about $14 million in costs that we're anticipating for upgrades between the two buildings, or between the two governments rather. But that's really a level that we're accustomed with dealing with. We have a lot of funding sources that are available to us. So we have about $750,000 in federal brownfield money that's available to do asbestos remediation, lead paint remediation, all of these things that will make the building safe to occupy. We have funding sources potentially through the Inflation Reduction Act to do things like upgrade heating systems and potentially electrify some of the building and improve its climate impacts or its climate footprint. We have this $200,000 lease payment that we will no longer be paying, that we can reinvest into the building and utilize as a funding source. We also have the opportunity to sell the city council chambers and take the proceeds from that and put them into the building. So it's going to be a number of sources. I mean, it'll probably be a dozen different sources of funding. But it's well within the capacity of local government to manage a project of this size.
Is there any other? I'm thinking of the older library right next door, which is being used in a variety of ways. Are there other consolidation of city properties, be they buildings or lots or land or things like that might be also analyzed as being part of this new mix?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing a lot with some other city land right now. So we're in the process of working on a housing development on the north side, just off of Scott Street. And that's 9 acres of city-owned land that we will be developing into affordable housing and also market rate housing. But we're utilizing that land in a really strategic way to meet our housing goals. And so that's the sort of thing that we can do with city-owned land throughout the community. We have we just listed, or we're just in the process of listing the former Sleepy Inn site for sale. So we used that as a non-congregate shelter during the pandemic, and unquestionably saved lives through that process, and are saved or recouped those funds through federal reinvestment, and we're now selling the property for redevelopment. So that was the sort of thing where we bought a property and had a use for it, and now we're turning it around and selling it, and at a benefit to the community. So we can look at that kind of thing at city-owned land throughout the community.
Taking the devil's advocate point, because I know this is what people are asking me. They go, "Oh, great, we got another building. Here comes another bond issue. Here comes some other taxing mechanism to pay for this."
Yeah.
What would you like folks to know when they look at that from that point of concern?
Well, I think the federal building is really approachable within the existing funding source. So we've got these opportunities to, like I said, to cobble is maybe not the right word, but to pull together all these different funding sources, and again to do it in a way that meets our long-term needs in a more affordable option. So we would have had to do something. that's the thing. We would have had to do something space-wise. We would have had to build a new building. We would have had to expand. And this is, again, it's the cheapest option, and it's approachable within our existing structure.
I would imagine that the cost of building a new building, if you just went out and started to do a new city hall, or if the county did something similar, like we're going to build a new administration building, that probably would have required a tax.
Yes.
I would imagine,
Yes,
right?
I think so.
Okay. All right, we got some questions coming in. Let's start working through a few of these. This is a good question. I've heard this asked too. Will the post office still be there to serve the public?
Yes.
Its current location very important to downtown business and the public. So, yeah, what about that sharing post office operations, or how would that be incorporated?
Yeah, so the post office is absolutely critical downtown, and we completely agree with that. We're definitely keeping the post office in the short term, and we're working through in the planning process as to whether or not we could use a portion of the post office space, whether or not they need all of the space that they have now, or what that could look like in order to keep them there. That's something that we're really interested in. But in the short term, we have arrangement with them, and they are going to stay in that building for at least a year or more. If in the event that there isn't room for them, we're going to be really active in helping them move and making sure that they stay downtown. So that's there's definitely a commitment from city and county to make sure that there's a post office downtown. Whether or not it's exactly where it is an open question, but for now, nothing will change.
Staying on the topic for the building for right now, we mentioned about total square footage. Would you say is about 100?
120.
120. Do we know what the split is between what the city would need, the county would need out of that 120?
We're still working through that. So our architects are going through and doing the space needs analysis for all the different departments, and where those fit. And back to what you mentioned about what's a real public function versus what's a more internal function. And so some of those really public-facing functions would be obviously at that real public entrance, and then other more less public-facing functions would be maybe a little deeper in the building.
Some of those would be, I would think, sort of a shared space situation too, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to draw, tape on the floor to say this is the county, this is the city.
Exactly.
In some of those things, if it's planning, permitting, I've seen that in other city-county buildings where it's pretty seamless.
We can do a lot through access control too. So I mean, we can have electronic door locks and whatever, depending on the employee's credential and where they work, they have access to certain parts of the building. And so we can be really deliberate about that public access.
If you're watching us on MCAT, and again, thanks to MCAT for hosting us and the Missoula Public Library. Number, if you have a question, you can call these in 552-6002, 552-6002. You can call in with that. Let's go ahead and move on to some other questions that have kind of come up, and let me get through these, and then we'll ask for show of hands for additional things. This question talks about the I read the who asked the question about Mountain 14? Oh, yeah. Go ahead and stand up. Let me get you on camera here for our audience. So I kind of got it, but I don't want to foul it up. So yeah.
I was wondering about the U.S. Forest Service compound at Mount and 14th.
Yeah.
We were talking some years back in our neighborhood council about possibly acquiring that area for a local park. Can we do the same thing I bet they'd give it to us.
Yeah.
I get your question. Thank you. Perfect. Yeah, that's a good question.
We would love it if they gave it to us. That has not been the answer we've been getting. We ask them every year or so what their plans are, and so far they're not planning to leave. We continue to hope that we can get our hands on that someday, it's just such a great location in the middle of town that maybe even if we just facilitate part of it being a park and part of it being housing or something like that, there's a lot of opportunity there. But it's something that we definitely are watching and trying to influence them in a positive way to vacate that space.
Is there a feeling that going through this good neighbor process and with this function, would that necessarily, are we getting experience that could help us in a situation like that or something with another piece, be it land or a building if it becomes available?
Yeah. Well, we have some staff in the audience tonight if I get out of my depth. But John Adams is one of our staff members who's here tonight, who is very well versed in these federal processes, very well positioned to kind of navigate us through, kind of Byzantine bureaucratic processes at the federal level, and so I think we're in a good place if those opportunities do come up.
Okay, all right. Talk a little bit about the the railroad crossing near Spruce and Duncan. That project has been delayed some. When can we get that one done? What's going on with that?
That's been a disappointment on our end. We have been slightly delayed, not slightly delayed. We've been significantly delayed by the transition from Montana Rail Link to Burlington Northern Santa Fe.
Which I will add is taking a little longer, because initially when that was announced, it's been about a year ago now, there was some feeling it was going to be done before the end of 22. Last thing I saw on that is they're talking sometime, maybe this spring sometime. They're trying to accelerate it, but it is still pending. It's not a done deal.
Yeah, so we had a meeting with Montana Rail Link, and they just a week or two ago, and they've been really, they've been helpful in advancing this process. The problem is that the two railroads have different requirements, and so we're now kind of needing to go through the process of meeting Burlington Northern Santa Fe's requirements. It's again a lot of federal bureaucracy on where and when and how and if you have to blow a train horn, and then the railroads have their own policies on top of that. It's I'll just acknowledge that it's been a significant frustration, and it's something that we've had a couple of meetings with Montana Rail Link, and they've been productive, and it's not I'm not placing blame. I'm just kind of disappointed by the new complexity that's been inserted into that process.
And some of that does come from federal policy, because you have the national. I can't remember the acronym right now, but the rail board basically that has to go through and sign off on a lot of different things. And one of the things they do is go through exactly what you're talking about. And crossings, what are those policies? What's going to change? All of that has to be reviewed.
And what we learned in this most recent meeting is that Burlington Northern Santa Fe has, I think, 32,000 track miles. I mean, they're a huge operator, and they have much more specific policies on how they do things. So we're just navigating that process between those two very complex and different structures. And I think I'll sometime this winter I'll have a more concrete update on what the next steps are. But that's kind of what the cause of the delay has been.
And I know last time I worked on a story on this, that MRL was still going to hang on to the Bitterroot line right of way. So there's probably not been any real discussions about what happens south of the river on through town, right?
Yeah, and I think MRL's been a good partner for us. I mean, over the years we've worked really well together, and we've had collaborative, sometimes
trail projects,
or things like that. And so again, we hope and expect that collaborative attitude and process will continue. It's just a little hiccup on anything that was in process as this transition occurs.
Here's a question, and I think next this is my chance to give a little bit of a promo. Next program, which is on, what is it, Jenny? February 22nd, I think you told me. We're going to be talking about property taxes, I believe. So
yes.
That'll be interesting. But this is sort of a tease on that. I keep hearing that the state should provide alternatives to property tax. What are some of those alternatives?
Yeah.
How closely are you watching, especially legislative things that are going on, when it comes to this issue of property tax alternatives?
Yeah, we're watching it really closely. We have a full team of people, really. We have someone in our office, in the mayor's office, who's really full-time job during the session is to track legislation. We have department heads and department staff throughout the organization who are weighing in on different bills that come forward. And we're taking a position and testifying when it's helpful. So yesterday I testified in support of House Bill 258, which is a measure that provides property tax relief and also relief to renters. And that's a one-time relief, and it's something that I know the Republicans in Helena seem to be very interested in providing some one-time property tax relief through with the large state surplus right now. So this was an effort to try to encourage that to really include renters and to include others in the community. But we really need thoughtful, long-term property tax reform, and I mean not just one-time relief. Our tax system is fundamentally broken in the state of Montana. We need some kind of meaningful reform. there was a legislative interim report last session that looked at local government revenues by type and state government revenues by type in Montana and throughout the country. And the state of Montana is, largely dependent on income taxes for their revenue, and they are not very reliant on property taxes. Well, local governments are between 96 and 97% of local government general fund revenues come from property taxes. And when you contrast that with other states, it's way more than other states. So we have this single tool. We're reliant on property taxes. The state doesn't give us any flexibility to use other revenue sources. My view is that back in the 80s, we had a property tax system that was really built on industry. We had 4 lumber mills operating around the clock. Our housing values were low. We didn't have much for tourism, and our economy. Our property tax system is built on that decades-old economy.
Resource-based economy. Yeah.
And now our property values are sky high. Our residential property values are sky high. We have a ton of tourists. It's our number one industry, and we don't capture any meaningful revenue out of tourists from a tax standpoint. So I would love to see some kind of local option tax that gets property tax, that provides property tax relief while capturing revenue out of our out-of-state visitors. And I think that's just much more in line with our modern economy, and much more in line with a fair tax, what I would view as a fair taxation system.
All right, let's open it up for the audience. A show of hands. Let's start on this side. It's a little closer. Go ahead and stand up and give us your name.
My name's Pete Lessica. I live in the Lower Rattlesnake, and 5 of my neighbors here. And we came here to talk to you about the train horn situation in the quiet zone. So you've answered some of those questions. So I guess my question, or a couple questions, is there anything that we can do to help Burlington Northern get going on this? And can we get you to move faster on it as well?
Yeah, those are great questions. I don't know if I have an answer to the first one yet. I don't know that there's an unwillingness so much as just a pause in the process. But I think I'll know that soon and could follow up as far as if there's any kind of neighborhood support or neighborhood action that could be useful. We continue to convey that it's important and that there's some real importance to get the project done in a timely manner. One of the things that is important that is important to me is that we have to get this thing wrapped up in time so that we can get it done we don't want to lose the whole construction season. And so like I mentioned, we had a meeting, a week or two, maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks ago with the local railroad, and they're getting some answers for us from BNSF. But I don't have a great answer other than that I will know more in a few weeks and would be glad to come to a neighborhood meeting or have provide information back out as far as kind of what the timeline and next steps are.
All right. Other questions? Yes, back here.
Hi, just on the same issue, I'm Jim Conkle. Is there a legal contract for this project? For the sound system on the railroad?
As far as with the railroad, or
yes.
with, I'm going to defer to our our staff on this as far as what the legal mechanism is. I'm not actually.
The follow-up is if it's in place, Northern bought that legal obligation, and I would encourage you to utilize that if that's part of the deal.
Yeah, and so just to really get in the weeds here, we're there's 2 crossings. So there's the crossing, there's the Madison crossing, and then there's a crossing down at Taylor Street, which is it's a private crossing, and it's the crossing at Taylor Street that we're working out the details on. It's because there's a different obligation as far as the horn blowing at that, and a different it's a different potential interpretation of the federal regulations. And so again, I'm going to get out of my depth really quickly, but I would be glad to I'd be glad to host a meeting and have an update, and we could get that set up in the next.
Some of that's interesting too. I mean, this is that transition that we're seeing from basically a local railroad with Montana Rail Link, where You know, you can pick up the phone. They're here. They're part of that. They're used to running a lot of smaller crossings, for one thing. And now you're going to Burlington Northern, Santa Fe, who is a much larger railroad, usually is not operating so much in an urban setting. So those things are different sometimes. So,
Yeah. Well, and I certainly appreciate the urgency, and like I said, I'd be glad to pull together a meeting to get everyone on the same page as to what's going on.
Okay, so make a note of that, folks. All right, other questions tonight as we're going along. All right, one thing I want to ask you, we talked about noise. This is an interesting one. Are there any other things on your radar right now from noise complaints or those kinds of things? Has anybody else brought up train whistles or any of those kinds of issues that you've sort of noticed in the past few months since you've been in office?
Well, I think construction noise is always something.
Yeah. We're noticing that a lot.
Yeah, and I think that's something that is just an annoyance. And I think one thing that we've been talking a lot about, even as it comes to public access and in the building, everything about the city operations, we're in this process of, we're kind of in this awkward zone between small town and city, and at some point, things change as far as how you handle construction noise permits and how you handle different things, and we're in this point, I think, where we are kind of having to think about things a little bit more as a small city, and maybe we have to have a little bit more of a permitting process for something like noise or whatnot, and
hours of operation type issues or those things.
And we've got our noise ordinance has hours of operation, but there's I mean, one thing, like we've done some night work on, particularly if we're doing utility work. We replaced a water main a few years ago under the Broadway and Orange Street intersection, and we did that during the middle of the night, and then at each day we'd fill it in so that intersection wasn't closed. So it took a couple extra days, but it was digging at night and doing the work, and then preparing it for traffic the next day, and so things like that where it's just it's not really acceptable to the public to close
a major
Broadway and Orange.
thoroughfare. Yeah, exactly.
And so there's things like that where we maybe just change the way we do business as we grow a little bit. But that's it's a good question. I'd say that's more the way that I've been thinking.
I'm always fascinated about how governments, not Missoula in particular, will things that you see happen and then 10, 20 years down the road it becomes. And I think of myself for example, you talk about noise. You've got the build project, right? All that growth in Mullen. At some point, we're used to hearing the amount of traffic we hear coming overhead with jets and planes and whatnot. As you could just see, 10 years from now, there's going to be a group of folks similar show up and say, how come, what can we do about all these planes? As traffic goes up at the airport, as things change. So it's fascinating to watch over time how we sort of work our way into different issues that may develop.
And I think the best thing we can do is have good planning. So the airport is a great example where we have a planning process for that neighborhood that we went through, and we came up with zoning for that new neighborhood and some areas where we really want to see a little bit more density, or areas where we want to see a little less density and whatnot. And that was really informed by that growth of the airport. And some of that again is you can't build within X distance of a flight path or runway or whatnot. And but some of that was just informing that growth based on that quality of life issue. And so I'm a big proponent of community planning. We've got a great opportunity to plug the Midtown Master Plan meeting tomorrow night at the fairgrounds. But these community planning processes where we really decide as a community what kind of community we want to live in, and then how we get to work to build it.
Perfect. Another call for any questions out here. So let's finish here because I think this might be a similar topic.
Yeah, just a couple things about the railroad crossings. It's my understanding that we essentially had an agreement with Montana Rail Link where if we put in the wayside horns at the Madison Street crossing, they would agree not to blow their horns at the Taylor Street crossing, and so we didn't have to do anything with that one. It sounds now as if Burlington Northern is going to insist on wayside horns at both crossings, or something else to be done at Taylor Street. Is that correct?
So I think that the bigger issue is that they have to affirm they'll keep doing. They'll have to affirm that they'll do what's been previously agreed to at Taylor Street, and they're not legally allowed to make decisions on the operation of the railroad until the deal is completed. And so there's kind of this process to just understand if to get an assurance that they'll honor that process at Taylor Street. And so there's no indication that they won't. It's really just
It's not their railroad yet.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
As I understand it, we have the funding, the agreements, everything. We even have a contractor lined up for the Madison Street crossing.
Yeah, my understanding is that there are a couple of minor design changes that need to be made as a result of BNSF having different standards at Madison Street. But I think the biggest liability would be if we were to build it and then Taylor Street, and then the bottom fell out of the Taylor Street deal. And so I think kind of my understanding is that we can have that agreement lined up.
Sort of queued up and ready to go.
That's my hope. And I don't want to promise on behalf of an entity that I have no oversight or control. My hope is that we can get those things sequenced in a way that doesn't cause us to lose a bunch more time. But I don't have a great answer other than that. That's my hope. And it's a point well taken as far as the irritation that causes and the delays that we've had.
It's kind of interesting too. A lot of people don't realize in the weather conditions too that we have right now, sound just travels.
Yeah.
You get these air inversions, and it's amazing. So if it's loud in the summer, it's really loud.
Really loud right now.
This time of the year, because it'll echo all over the place. So
Yeah.
Okay, other questions?
And the Rattlesnake Valley is a nice acoustic
theater.
theater.
It has that going for us. Okay, yes. Stand up and give us your name, please.
Carl, in regards to the master plan, how much of a master plan do you actually have in regards to possible growth and so forth? And you're talking about taxes. Are the general public ignorant why taxes are taxed in regards to operating municipalities?
Oh no, I don't think so at all. I think that my view on the tax system is really that the system is not very fairly created. But I think we get a lot of people that express they want to see more services. They certainly don't want to see a decline in services. And so there's this tension between funding services and providing a level of service that the public expects and this broken tax system. So I think it's more that I think it's important to just start talking more about this property tax system and to really start having more of a dialogue about how to fix it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Carl brings up, and I'm glad you brought this up, though, Carl. This is an interesting point because if you look back over the last, I want to say 7 years, probably since 2014 or 15, and you look at the different things that people voted for, whether it was Fort Missoula Regional Park, whether it was this library that we're in, whether it was, the big school bond issue for MCPS. I mean, all of them worthwhile, all of them very interesting, all of them. But there comes a point where, somebody that was a library person now is saying, well, why did I pay for Fort Missoula Park? And somebody who's involved in sports now says, why did I have to pay for a library? Information gets to be an important thing, especially if we're talking about reform, right? I think that's what I'm hearing you say as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that we have tried to be good fiscal stewards over the years, and we really try to. I mean, I am just as an example, we've got a nice graphic that I should highlight back there about the federal building and the different ages of that. But we're reusing the same piece of foam board for however many years. Where it's like we really, the city really scrimps and is really a good. That's been the thing that actually has been the most remarkable to me in kind of being in this new role is just how much. What a lean organization it is, and what a big organization it is. I mean, there are so many different things that the city does, and they have such a wide range of impacts throughout the community. and some people don't use all the services. Some people use services more than others. Sometimes, there's a service that you hope you never have to use, like, calling the fire
or they
department.
make what I call a quality of life vote, where it says, well, I don't really use the library, but I know it's a good thing to have.
Yeah. And I think that dialogue about our property taxes and our property tax system is something we need to be having statewide. I think that our system is fundamentally broken. I think it's broken in Billings. I think it's broken in Malta. I think it's broken in Hysham. And I think that we need to have.
Let me get you back on mic here, Carl. Hang on.
The state of Montana changed on this industrial revenue and so forth. And so everything has to follow suit. So they're going to have to create a different financial structure of supplying or giving Montana some wealth.
Most people do not realize, and I do, because I've covered so many mill closures, and what that's done, not just in Montana, but across the Northwest, where you would lose a mill, a pulp mill or a paper mill or whatever, or a sawmill for that matter, and or other manufacturing, but especially the wood products, you would lose that. And I mean, you're talking hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars to a state organization, especially, that just went by the wayside. And oftentimes you have property, say like Smurfit Stone, perfect example, that's just kind of setting fallow right now. And we're not the only ones that have that. There's communities all over the Northwest that have that similar situation. So I think that's a little bit about what you're talking about, is that you had a fairly large bucket for that kind of tax revenue, that those things have gone away over the last 25, 30 years.
Well, and I think that we have a robust economy that is
it's just a different structure.
It's a different structure. And so, we have this tourism economy that brings a lot of money into small businesses in the community. We have a good, like, even small scale manufacturing economy that's growing. We have Paradise Dental here in Missoula that manufactures dental implements, dental cleaning implements that they sell worldwide, and they're a good employer with good wages and good, and we have all of these different things that we've got this tech economy, but our tax structure hasn't kept up. And so back in the 80s, that example that I gave, about 20% of our local government revenue came from residential property taxes. Now in Missoula County today, it's 80%. So that burden has shifted. So we're still funding the government, we're still paying for the services, but that burden has shifted almost exclusively to homeowners and to renters and to people who, it's a residential cost instead of being a cost elsewhere in the economy.
I want to ask too one other thing. Excuse me, Carl. This came to my mind when we were talking tax a little bit, and not to go too hard. This is again kind of a preview of our big topic for the next month's gathering. So bring these questions back. But one final comment on this question: how concerned are you when we look at the growth in our roads, in particular, roads, bridges, all those things? MDT's replaced our bridges, so that's helped. But when you look at what we have to face as a city streets, with the disparities that we see in gas tax revenue right now, is that also a point of concern? It's not just property taxes, right?
Yeah. So infrastructure funding is a huge problem, and it's a huge problem nationwide. So we have infrastructure that we around the country that we're not adequately funded to maintain. So our gas tax revenue is not adequate. It has not kept up with the cost of maintaining our roads, and that's a federal problem with the Highway Trust Fund. But it's a problem at the local level. And again, the legislature a few years ago took away our locally voted in gas tax. Yeah. So Missoula County voters voted to add a gas tax, a 2 cent a gallon gas tax, and that was bringing in that would have brought in a little over $1 million a year. And they took away that ability. So we lost that source, and so we actually took a step backward in the last legislative session. And I think again, we just need to start talking about it more. But we have about $12 million a year of kind of a deficit in our we have this maintenance backlog that is that's how much it would take us to adequately maintain our streets. So I mean, we really, and again, it's a problem around the country.
Oh yeah,
and it's a problem in especially in these cold climates where you get freeze thaw cycles and potholes And so our streets department will go through and do streets repairs. They really kind of triage more, but to be truly well funded in a streets department, we would just need that much more revenue. And again, that's not a Missoula problem.
No,
that's
broader than
a broader problem. So another thing the legislature could do this session is provide some matching funds for federal infrastructure grants, or provide with part of the surplus. One thing that they could do is really fund local infrastructure in a meaningful way. Personally, if it came to me, I mean, I would rather than receive a one-time rebate. I heard it called the snowblower rebate.
I've heard that. Yeah,
you buy a snowblower or something,
and then you're done.
Yeah, and I would much rather have like our sewer systems around the state fixed, or something along those lines, where you would have some pressing public works need that was dealt with this money,
or required a way to have train whistles.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. But we're kind of moving in to wrap up. I do want to kind of close off on the federal building, because this is our opportunity to ask: are there any other specific questions about this acquisition of this, or how it might be used? I know we've got some of our students in the area. Anybody else have any questions on that? Is there a way? Go ahead. While we're asking this question, Jenny, could we get somebody to I'd like to bring this graphic over here, and then maybe have Jordan sort of show us just kind of what we're looking at, so that we have an idea. But let me get this question. Joel, I'm sorry, we're going to foul you all up here. Let's go here first while they're moving that in.
My name is Mike. It's sort of a general question that sort of haunts the downtown. What about parking?
Yeah, it's a great question.
I mean, you're
For this facility?
Yep.
facility, because you have day use parking,
Yep.
and obviously you have the employee parking. So you're sort of shifting from one end of town to the next. It is going to be miserable in that area. And I don't live in that area,
Yeah.
but I guarantee it's miserable.
So I think I think the biggest thing is that the downtown is managed by the Missoula Parking Commission, and when and there's parking adjacent to City Hall, but it's not actually City Hall parking other than police vehicles. So there's some leased parking spaces in there that people can lease, and they may or may not work in City Hall. And so most we have 400. We'll have about 400 employees in the new building, and a few years back we had 400 employees in that building. And so it's the downtown parking infrastructure, whether it's changing pricing so that people park a couple blocks away and walk, or things like that. It's going to have to be a tool where we encourage people to park elsewhere. I think so. Right now, City Hall, we don't provide parking for city employees right now. And they're just kind of, they either park in a garage a few blocks away and walk, or they park at the edge of downtown and walk in, or they pay a premium and park right next to the building. And so it's going to be the same, where we might have to manage parking a little differently. I think visitor parking is something that we have to get right. And so I think having short-term visitor parking is one of the biggest priorities. And then really encouraging staff to use other modes, take transit or bike or walk downtown, or to park, encourage them through incentives and pricing to park a little bit away from the building.
Because we do have the Patty Creek structure as well.
Yeah.
That's not too far away.
Yeah.
A couple blocks.
And so the last I heard was about that it would be north of $10 million to build a new parking garage that would serve that building. And so our preference is going to be to kind of manage that through the parking commission, through regulations, and I think we're just going to have to get it right through tweaking those pricing areas and those regulations. But it's definitely it's definitely part of the planning process.
Great question. Thank you for asking that. Before we wrap up here tonight, Jordan, I want to put this up, and let me move it over just a little bit, because I want you to be able to point and show us here. So in this structure, what are we looking at? So this is a outline of what you've got, right, with the existing building. What's there? So point out, for example, the existing post office operations, and then kind of what some of those ideas are.
Okay. So this is north. This is Patty Street. This is Broadway. The post office is here. Romer's Tire is there. And so these are color coded by when the additions were built. So the original post office section was built in 1913. The next
This
area,
is the classic front that we see on Broadway, right?
Yeah. So this is the corner of Broadway and Patty right here. And then this area was built next. There's this, you might have noticed the glass greenhouse there. My understanding was that the Forest Service used that actually as a
I
greenhouse.
think they
for a
did,
period of
yeah,
time.
for a greenhouse.
And
Yeah,
I don't think it worked all that
experiments
well.
and stuff. No.
But it's a beautiful space. It's cool. And then that was built in 1929, and then the rest of the building was built in 1938. And so there's 4 entrances. So again, it's kind of figuring out where the main public entrance. The main public entrance will be ultimately over here. But then what are the functions of the other entrances, and how does
And post office operations as we stand now, how much do they use?
they have about 4,000 square feet.
So is it primarily
It's-
this
it's-
front of this, right?
Yeah, it's primarily this area over here. And they, one thing I can say is long term, they won't be in that exact spot using that exact amount of space. And so that's one thing that, whether if they're in the building, they may be, and we hope, that's, if they're in the building long term, it might be a different configuration. But that's all, it's just way too early to say anything with
How that's going to work out. And then what do we have in this area? I know people have asked about, this part of this schematic here.
Yeah, so this is a service courtyard right now. It's got a loading dock for the post office. There's some mechanical air handling devices and all
stuff,
that kind of
yeah.
thing. I think some of that we'll try to get up on the roof. And this space could provide, if there's court in this building, it could provide bailiff parking or things like that. I think it's really, as much as I'd love to see it a more public facing space, I think it's really more of a service area. It's kind of, every building has a back where the trash gets collected and that kind of thing. And at the back of this building is really kind of the middle of it. But
No thought given to closing this in or doing something. That'd be fairly expensive, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I don't think, and there's one of the nice things about this design is that there's good windows and good natural light. There's actually an interior courtyard. Just the way they designed these buildings, before air conditioning and before good efficient artificial lighting. They had this light shaft that provided light and air to the interior of the building. So there's this interior courtyard. So there's things like that are really nice design amenities of the building, or even things like this, where it's all designed to have more windows and get more light into the building.
And final question, and just because we have particular colors on here, this doesn't indicate, city gets the green, county gets the blue, we'll fight over yellow, right? It's not anything like that.
No, the color coding is just when it was built.
Okay.
There's a dozen other maps with color coding of who could go where, and they're all drafts and they're all moving around, and really it's about that function and public service, and so that's that process. And we'll have opportunities we'll have some public meetings in this process to talk more about this and to be involved.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, thank you, Jordan. I appreciate that. We had such a spiffy diagram there. I wanted to use it for a second so we could visualize a little bit for the audience here and, of course, people at home. So timing-wise, what's the final question here? What's kind of the next process of this, or the next thing? You mentioned public meetings, but what's sort of first up in terms of now starting to move into utilizing this?
Yeah, so there were certain things that we couldn't do until we had the building. There's actually still some federal employees in the building. They're leasing the building from us, and they'll be moving out sometime this spring. So there's about 15 to 20 federal employees in this giant building, and so part of it is getting doing this due diligence, or not even due diligence, but the design work and the
lead testing, asbestos,
all of that.
All those things.
The testing for seismic capabilities and all of that. And so we have our architecture team has put together a conditions report and an initial scope of work of what will need to be done. So it's refining that and really figuring out with the city and county who exactly is moving and all of that. Then we need to get a contractor on board and get that process going. So
I would imagine, given what you described, this is going to take most of the year, though, right?
Well, it'll take
Or
most of the year
of
for
23 at least
to get all that planning done,
Yeah.
and then construction in 24, and then occupying the building in early 25. So
Okay.
it'll be a little ways out. I
Yeah.
mean, it's an exciting moment for us because we have the building now, and that was touch and go. 2 months ago, it wasn't certain when we would get it, or I mean, we certainly knew we would get it, but it could have been 3-4 years out.
Yeah.
I mean, and so it was really kind of this is a moment now where we can celebrate that we have the building and we can really do the final planning in earnest, and then
And I think again to understand too, obviously we had a little virus to worry about there, so just trying to get a lot of progress in 20.
Yeah.
I know kind of slowed up that work as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just was going to happen. All right, good. Well, Jordan, Mayor, we appreciate your insight on those things. Thank you for everybody who came tonight to share your questions and comments, and you're always welcome to come back. That's what this is all about. Is we will have a topic or something that we want to primarily cover, but it may stir some additional questions from any of you that come here. Again, want to thank Joel and the team from MCAT for being here as city staff as well. I think there's still some cookies left, so have some of those as we wrap up. I want to thank our audience on MCAT as well. And don't forget, this will be available on a later basis on demand as well. So we have that. Coming up, what do we got? February, what's our next date here? Let me get my wrong notes here. What's our next date? 22nd. 22nd. We're going to be talking taxes for that one, I believe.
property tax reform.
Property tax reform. So we had good questions. Carl, come on back and we'll get a little bit more. And those are the rest of you as well. So thanks for being with us tonight, and we appreciate you being here. Mayor Hess, thank you for your time as well. And thanks for being with us for Wednesdays for the Mayor. Good night.
Thanks for coming, everyone.